So once again, good afternoon. So thank you for attending. As of now, we have 20 participants. So we are actually expecting more than 40. So, but anyway, I will save the recording later so that uh, those who cannot attend today still can access the recorded session tomorrow or after I uploaded it to our LMS. Uh, Kindly check if my audio is clear.
Yes, sir.
Yes, sir.
How about the presentation? The presentation.
Okay man po, sir. Clear,
Ayos
sir.
na, sir.
Okay. So thank you. So let's begin. Before we start our topic for this afternoon, I would like to continue the discussion yesterday. So our topic yesterday is all about include and require. So let me explain the difference between uh, require and include. Okay. So actually, there's no difference between require and include. Ah, Nagkakaroon lang sila ng difference doon sa behavior whenever the PHP script encountered an error. Example, if the require or include file is missing or cannot be accessed, si require uh, error yung lumalabas, while si include warning. And then sa require, if ever the file is missing, the script will stop executing the file or the script. While sa include, it will still continue executing the file. Although it produces a warning, but the preceding statement will be executed. So, yun yung pinagkaiba. So, kailan ba natin siya ginagamit? So, ginagamit natin siya if ever we want to insert section of a particular file or content that is separated from a page. So, in my example, yesterday, let me browse to the last section of my slide so to demonstrate. Okay. So, for example, let me give an example. Okay. So, for example, you have created a page. So, usually, a web page or a web application is consisting of several sections of a page. Merong menu, merong section kung saan na-identify yung content. Ano po. Now, when you develop pages, the most commonly procedure that we perform is to separate each section from a file. For example, this one is the head part. So gumagawa kami ng head.php. Of course, uh, when you develop application, nag-i-start sa tinatawag na mock-up. Ano po? So what is a mock-up? A mock-up is like a prototype of your website. So you just like simulating the concept into an actual HTML page. So nag-start tayo sa sketch parang ganito, just like this one, and then we convert it to a mock-up which is working page that can be viewed in the browser. And then if we want to integrate it with a what we call responsive or dynamic, when you say dynamic, it actually accommodates a specific action that is being performed by the user. So, kung naman behavior ng user, nire-respond niya. So, what we do usually is to separate each section of the page. Okay. Hinihiwalay namin sa, let's say, head, hiwalay yung menu, so that we could have focus on each section. Let's say, for example, this one is the uh, sliding images. So, what will happen is, siniseparate namin siya into different file. So, let's say, ito yung sliding images.php. This one is the menu. So, it's like, parang trying to uh, isolate important feature of the page, something like that. So that's the purpose of separating the file. Ano po. And then, if ever, isa sa mga advantage nito is, one of the advantage of this is that when different users are working on that particular project, they have uh, focus on a specific section that they are assigned to. So that's one of the purpose. And after focusing on each section, gagawa sila ng page and then i-include nila yan doon sa page na ginagawa nila para magkaroon tinatawag na integration. So para yung functionality na ginawa ni developer 1 at section na ginawa ni developer 2 ma-integrate sa isang page. So kasi pangit naman kung you have two developers and you are working with the same file. So what will happen to that particular file if we encountered some conflict? Let's say, merong nagalaw si developer 2 na dapat hindi magagalaw kasi ginawa sa ni developer 1. So para maiwasan yun, hinahati-hati natin yung file to allow the user focus on or the developer focus on a specific section. That's why we use include para ma-emerge siya doon sa main file. Okay? So, ganun po yung tinatawag natin include. So, we'll be doing that by next few meetings. So, for now, let us uh, learn first the concept and we will try to implement that pag meron na tayong ginawang application at meron siyang separation ng file. So, ma-explain na sa inyo ng maayos yung particular application niya. So for now, let us continue the discussion. Okay. So for today's uh, session, so this is actually our session number 3. So our focus right now is developing a function, identifying the function, the software globals, and session variables. Okay. So what are our objectives for today's discussion? Number 1, we're going to define what is a function, how does it affects the development of the program, how does a function become helpful to developers, especially web developers. Majority of users or programmers or developers are actually implementing modular approach in developing applications since every program has their different functionality. So they develop application based on different modules. Okay. Number 2, I'm going to discuss and identify the components of a function. So what are the components of a function? Okay, calling function with and or uh, how we can call function with or without a parameter and write a value and non-value returning functions. This is with and without parameters, something like that. Okay, so let's continue. And then also, part of our topic is the discussion of software global variables. Uh, I just only focuses on these three. Actually, meron tayong several global variables. So, aside from these three, sa pagkakaalam ko, ang global variables ay binubuo ng uh, number 1, post, number 2, get, number 3, request. And other things are session, okay? Pero hiniwalay ko na siya. Session. This is considered to be software global kasi ginagamit natin siya sa entire uh, page ng ating application. When you say software global, these are uh, particular variables that we can access any particular page that we have. So as you all know, when you develop pages, let's say page 1, this is page number 2, and you have a variable x here, something like that, you cannot easily access variable x from different pages. So since these are independent pages, so we cannot do that in web development. We cannot access the value of x that is being used in page number 1 and display it on page number 2. The only way to do that is to process it with super global variables. That's why when we add users to input data, we use form, and the method that we usually use is either get or post, right? And also request. Other Other super global variables are the word global itself, globals. When you declare global variables, the server, the files, the environment variables, the cookie. If you are familiar with cookie, a cookie is a type of server global variable that allows you to maintain the value uh, throughout the pages. Example, if you can still remember how pages ask permission to allow cookies to save into your local browser, the purpose of that is to save local data. Sometimes other websites use that data to identify possible user actions, like what particular content that they usually visit, or sometimes if you are familiar with shopping uh, websites or social media, when you log into their sites, it allows you to go back whenever you want without logging in or logging out anymore. So, sinisave nila yung mga session or yung mga activities mo or yung username password mo para whenever you want to access the website again, you don't have to log in anymore. So, that is cookies. Okay? So, yun. So, aside from, so those are our topic for this afternoon. Okay, so let's start with functions. Okay, what is a function? Uh, we usually, uh, what you call this, in programming, in software development, we usually uh, perform developing application using modular. That's why we use functions. In PHP or web development, we can also implement functions in PHP. So functions are generally the block of codes or statements. So what's the difference between the structure that I discussed yesterday and this one? Those structure that I discussed are the common structure that we encountered in developing application. That's how you change the behavior, the execution of the program. While this one is another type of it's like a structure, but you are trying to develop a particular implementation that you can isolate a certain code or block of code. And then you can call them whenever you want. It's most especially if that block can be called several times in your program. So you don't want to create a block that is repeatedly written in your code. Instead, you create a file or you create a section in your program that put a function there, and if your program requires to perform a certain action based on that function, you can call them anytime or uh, whenever you want them to execute the statement. So that is a function. So this function has the ability to reuse the same code, which ultimately saves the excessive use of memory. Okay, so imagine if you have a certain block and those block requires you to perform action 10 times. So in order to minimize the execute or minimize the writing the code 10 times, just write the code one time and make that a function. Whenever you want to call that, just call the function, and the function will perform a certain task and return a result, something like that. So it acts as a time saver, and more importantly, it provides better readability of code. Readability, which means since it is a separated block from your main program, you have what you call main focus of implementing the function that you need. So whenever you encounter invalid result or error in the particular result, you can focus your attention on a certain block, not on the entire program itself. So that's the purpose of developing a function. So uh, so basically, it is a collection of statements. So valid statements uh, that perform some specific task. Okay, and return the result to the caller. So kung ano yung ginamit mo na statement to call the function, ibabalik sa iyo yung result na gusto mong makuha. Just like what we usually do in programs, like when you call a function to compute the what we call that, let's say square root of a number, and when you assign that to variable, you call the function, automatically the function or the variable will contain the square root of the number. So a function can also perform some specific tasks without returning anything. So a function can return a value, or a function can just perform a task without returning a result. Okay. Okay. Since we are talking about function, we also referring to modular programming. When we say modular programming, that is breaking a program up into smaller and manageable functions or module. Okay, just like example, our human body is composed of separate functionality that has their own purpose. So uh, we have the different parts like our hands, our feet. So they have their own function, but they can act as ano separate uh, tawag dito, separate portion or separate functionality, but made up our body as one functional one. Okay, something like that. So functions is a collection of statements to perform a specific task. So what are the things that we need to consider in creating a function? Number one is, does a particular module requires a specific action that requires to accomplish? Then if yes, you need to create a separate function for that, so that each time that you need to perform the same task over and over again, all you have to do is to call that function. Okay. So why do we develop, or why do we uh, program in a modular form? Number one is to simplify the process of writing program. To simplify, so sometimes the number of lines that we write uh, allows us to sometimes uh, causes us some hard time developing or fixing some bugs whenever a bug is occurred in our program. So the more the code that you have, the more analysis and reading of each statement requires, and it requires time to perform. But if you have function, so the primary purpose of that is for you to be able to focus on that particular block only, not in the entire system or program. It also allows us to improve maintainability of the program. So I remember one time when I developed a program, so whenever a customer asks me to update a certain functionality, I don't have to write the entire program anymore. Instead, all I have to do is to focus on a certain functionality that they need, or certain functionality that needs an update. So that allows me to have a quicker and easier way of managing my program. So that's one of the advantage of using a function. Okay. Now, okay, next. So what does a function looks like? So for example, if you have a PHP script that has multiple statements, something like this. So imagine you have 700 to 1,000 lines, and uh, for example, you encountered an error in your program. So imagine the time that you need to spend looking for each statement to fix the error. Okay, so that's what we usually do, the sequential way of fixing errors. So using one long sequence of statements to perform a task, that's what you call the traditional, or the sequential method of writing program. But when you use methods or function, you divide and conquer a problem. So for example, you have these separate functions like add numbers. You have a function to check the account, and you have a function to check the balance. So all you have to do is to call them one by one if ever you need them to perform a result. So whenever something went wrong to a particular result, all you have to do is focus your attention on specific block only, not in the entire program. So it's like more on isolating the problem rather than identifying each statement one statement at a time. Okay? So that's very helpful, especially if your time is very important in important on developing that application. It requires uh, uh, faster way of developing, or you have needed to target a deadline and you need to fixing some unknown error. So you have focus on that. So just like this in this example, whenever a certain function returns an error, so may focus on this particular block only. So I can examine the entire code and identify how to fix that error. So that's very convenient for you to solve. Most especially if you have several programmers that are developing the applications. So if ever you are not the one who developed the application, but the 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 manager requires you to fix a particular error, so you don't have to examine the entire code that being developed by other programmers, and you don't have to understand the entire convention that is being applied by by other programmers. So all you have to do is to focus your attention on a certain block, study that block, focus on the variables, the execution, and the statement and the sequence. Then it will be easier for you to navigate that particular block. Okay, so yan. If you have question, you can write your questions using our comment box. So by the way, this is recorded. So, okay. Now, let's continue. Okay, so how do we create a function? So we call that user-defined function. Meron tayong function na tinatawag, we call that built-in function that is actually built-in in your language, the PHP. But you can define your own function. That's why we called it user-defined. So ikaw yung gumagawa ng sarili mong function for your own purpose. So you can develop function like you write the statement function inside the PHP block, of course. So function, then name your function. So always name your function according to its purpose. For example, say something or compute something or check account, check balance, something like that. And the function should be uh, uh, it can be multiple words, but it doesn't have to be or don't have to be contain any spaces. You can put underscore. In this case, my function name is following a naming convention called camel case. So may combination ng two words plus capital letter yung second word, something like that. Okay? So as long as when you name a function, assign a name that performs its purpose. And of course, you need to put parentheses so that we can enclose a particular input or something and a curly brace followed by the statements inside and of course the close curly brace. So take note, when you develop a function, you should follow the right syntax in order for them to work. So this is our example, this one. So in this example, we have a function named say hello. So this function, the primary purpose of this is to just print, hi, it's nice to see you on the user screen. So in order to uh, use them, all you have to do is to call the function name, let's say something. I forgot to write the example implementation. Okay. So when you call that function in your program, you can easily address or execute this line here. Okay. So if you require to your program to say something 10 times, all you have to do is to write this 10 times. Okay. So it depends upon how you use them. Okay. Now let's continue. Okay, calling a function, to call a function, use the function name followed by a parenthesis. So let's say hello or say something. So when a function is called, the program executes the body of the function. So when you call them, it will execute this particular statement. Okay? Yes, ma'am. Yes po. Pwede man siguro, ma'am, i-merge na lang. Kaya may mga group pa man na okay lang naman apat. Oo, sayang man, enrollees yan. Okay lang, ma'am. I-accept na lang. Kay sayang man, enrollees. Tama po. Okay, sorry for that. But anyway, let me continue. Okay, so, oops, saan na tayo? Okay, how to define a function? So when using a function, you must know the following about function before it is being called. Number one, so when you call a function, what is the name of the function? So that you can identify. So that's why in defining your function, it's really important that you name it after its purpose. Let's say check account, login user, or check user, so that you can easily call them or recognize what function you defined, and you can easily identify uh, when to use them, something like that. Number two, what or how many parameters does a function or type has? When I say parameters, what possible values that the function accepts? Later, I'm going to give an example. And what types of value that the function accepts? And does the function returns a value or returns a result or not? So that's the things that you need to consider when you use a function. Maybe the function is being developed by other developers. So these are the questions that you need to ask them. I want to use the function that you develop, but when I want to use them, what should I call? Or what name did you put in your function in order to call them? Does your function requires parameters? Does your function prints or just return a value? So those are the things that you need to consider. Okay, so how do we define a function? Number one, of course, the function name. And by the way, this is another function that has a parameter. So this is what you call parameter. Okay, but before that, let us try to implement that in an example so that you can easily identify. Okay, for example, we have here a page. Okay, let's say PHP. Okay, so let's say, uh, is my screen big enough to recognize the text or not? Do you want me to zoom in? Something like this. Okay na ba yan? Okay, so in this example, we have a function that accepts parameter. Parameter can be depending on what the function needs. It can be one, two, or more, and so on. And a function can also return or not return a value. So if ever your function does not return a value, just like what I have discussed a while ago, the previous example doesn't return a value, just echo anything, it's okay. Okay? So in this case, the function returns a value. By the way, a function can only return a single value. But what if your value requires to return multiple values? That's the time you use an array in order to a function to support multiple return of values. Okay, so that's one of the main reason why we need to use an array. So if the function performs a task and requires to return multiple values, then you need to return an array type data. Okay, so how do we create a function that accepts parameter? Okay, so in this case, we have compute sum, and in this case, we have two parameters. The n1, which is the first number, and n2, which is the second number. So in this case, we compute the sum, and whatever value the user send as an argument to these particular two variables, it will be computed, and your function will return the sum of those two numbers. For example, your num1 has a number came from the submitted form as well as num2. Then when you call the function, you submit those values as a arguments. This is now what you call arguments. So arguments. That is the value that is being passed to a function. So, nagiging parameter lang siya kung dinefine mo ang function, ano yung ina-accept niya. Okay, so when the function is being called, the submission of data is sequential. So, num1 will be submitted to n1, num2 is submitted to n2. So, when the user input, let's say 10 and 20, so this will become 10, 20, oh sorry, 20, and this will become 10, 20. So 10 plus 20 would be 30. So it will be returned pabalik at i-display niya. So which means whenever the function is being called, it will return the sum of those two values. So that's how function works. Okay, so let's try. Now, the problem with this example is that this is initialized to 10 and 20. So what if we have a value that is being defined by the user? So how can we do that? So we need to create what we call parameter. Okay, so the parameter P1, let's say P1, P2, something like that. So when you create a function, always document them. Let's say for example, let's say function name, so that when other user or student reads your code, they have idea what does the function performs or do. So compute sum. Let's say parameter. Kung walang parameter, just put none. That's how you properly document your function. Let's say P1, this is numeric data 1. And we have P2, numeric data 2. Sorry, I forgot the comment. Okay. And then, meron ba siyang returns? Return. So, computed sum. Okay. You can also describe, let's say, purpose. Anong purpose niya? So, this function computes the sum of two numbers. Something like that. So, returns the sum, let's say integer or numeric. Something like that. Okay? So, interchange natin siya. Let's interchange the question mark with P1 and P2. Something like that. So, instead of echoing, since this function returns a value, we use the return keyword. Return. Okay? You can also use this one, or you can just create another variable that will calculate the sum. Let's say sum. It doesn't matter how you write them as long as it serves its purpose. Okay, that's sum. Okay. So as you can see, it returns numeric data. So if ever we call the sum, notice it now expects two arguments. So argument na ang tawag sa kanya. Two arguments. Okay. So let's try. Let's say 2 and 4. So 2, 4, something like that. Okay, so let us refresh. Okay, so now, ah, so as you can see, in my example, it doesn't return any result. Although it returned, but we didn't print it into our screen because we just compute them and return the numeric data, but we didn't echo them. So echo. That's the difference between the first example is that in our first example, we echo it inside the function. So since we don't echo it in the second example, in order to display the result, we need to echo that when we call the function, something like this one. So meaning, the sum of those numbers will be echoed here, not inside the function, but in this particular line only. Okay, so let's try. Yeah, so it works. So Uh, when do we need to create a function? Again, when the task is too complicated and if the tasks are need to be isolated to the main program, or if the task requires other developer to uh, perform a certain action in a modular form, or we call it module, modular programming. So, for example, you are working as a team and each uh, team members has their own uh, tawag dito, jobs that needs to be performed. Then, your task is to develop a function, and at the end of the day, all you have to do is to document a function and allow other group to call your function in order to use them. So that's why you need to have or create a function in your program. Okay? And sometimes we use function just to set a particular or to separate different tasks. That's the main reason why, or reasons why. Again, we develop function to modularize the development. We develop function in order to isolate a certain task and call them whenever that we need them. Number three, we develop function to what we call that, to divide and conquer the task, something like that. Okay. So, sir, can you give us an example of a function? Okay. I'm going to give you an example, real example of a function. So let me browse my browse my okay. So para meron naman tayong example or evidence na ginagamit pala talaga yung function. Okay. Okay, so I have here example program. So okay, medyo ano lang to ha. Medyo madami ng konti. Okay. So I have here a function. Okay. Okay, so this is my function. So I have here object-oriented based program. So I have here a function that will display data if ever I display an index, I call an index. So here is the function for a model that will get the data. So wala tayong idea kung paano nila ginagawa as long as alam natin na pag ginamit mo siya, it returns records, something like that. Another example is this. You just create a variable and call the model of the program, and you call all, meaning you just call the function to display all the records coming from departments table and render it to your program. So that's how the function works. Okay. This is another function, public function, that whenever a user select a course and want to edit them, this function will retrieve the selected course and uh, display it into the form, something like that. This one, this function validates, this one is validating the data, if the data is filled up correctly, unique ba siya, uh, greater than zero ba siya. So these are complicated tasks that requires isolation or isolated uh, uh, development so that you have a full focus on developing the task. Okay, so this one, a function that identifies if the validation here is failed or not. If it is failed, return an error. If not, all you have to do is to save the record. Now, this seems to be complicated because this is something new, but I want you to understand that developing a function is very important, especially if you are working on groups or especially if you are developing a very complicated and very complex task. Okay? Let me give you another example. Okay. Saan na ba yan? Okay. I have here a system that a web-based system that is developed using my masteral uh, project. Let me look for it first. Hello, nandiyan pa ba kayo? Wait, pwede kayo mag-comment. Let me check
Yes, sir.
let me check. Okay, may nagpaalam daw, siglay sa Insugo. Okay, okay lang. No worries po. Okay. Hanapin ko lang yung aking, okay. Okay, let me present this one first. Kasi, di ba sabi ko kanina, when you develop an application, dapat gagawa ka muna ng prototype, di ba? So, meron akong prototype dito. We call this mock-up. Okay. So, nung ginawa ko yung thesis ko, ang ginawa ko mock-up muna. Okay, let me close first the first, okay. Kasi nagra-run siya sa ibang example. Wait lang let me, okay, I have here, okay, so paano po kayo nag-develop ng application? So ako, ginagawa ko, mock-up muna. Okay. So, nag-identify ako ng particular interface para sa application ko. And then, from HTML, kinonvert ko sa, from sketches, kinonvert ko sa HTML. Of course, para mas productive yung trabaho, may mga available na tayong templates online that you can access and distribute for free. So, may mga tinatawag tayong open source. So, you don't worry about using them since it's really uh, uh, okay to use them. So, let me display it into your screen. Okay, localhost. Okay. Yung system na ginawa ko is all about system evaluation. So, web-based siya. Uh, okay. Naka-zoom pala na ako. So, meron akong dalawang type ng user. Yung sa user and sa administrator. Okay. So, medyo naka-zoom lang siya. Ayan siya. Okay. Okay. So, ayan siya. Okay lang. Nakikita po ba? Medyo
Yes, sir.
hindi siya naka-center sa screen nyo kasi naka-zoom yung screen nyo kasi sa aking recorder. Okay, okay na no? So yan, very basic lang siya. So pag login ng user, let's say pag nag-login siya, so wala pang coding to. Purely ano lang. Okay, ito gagawin niya. So meron tayong uh, different functionality like this one is the user. Pag nag-login siya, meron ditong records na makikita. Ano po, project management, etc. Ito kasi ginagamit namin to evaluate system. For example, if the administrator allows you to evaluate a particular application based on certain functionality and criteria, evaluate mo yung system, dito ka sasagot. So this is like a mock-up that uh, shows some interface of the application. So meron ako ditong admin. Okay. So wala pang logic yan. Parang PHP lang yan. Hinihiriwalay ko. Okay? Ayan na siya. So, alas kapares lang siya, pero iba yung functionality ni admin. So, active customer, something like that. So, ayan. So ibig sabihin, pag nag-work na siya, ganito rin yung magiging function niya. Category management. So, that's what mock-up means. When you develop a system, you just write the interface or design first the interface. Kung web application siya, display mo muna sa browser para makita mo yung logic or sequence ng application mo. Okay? So, yun. Now, pakita ko yung sample program ko dito na ginawa. Okay. So, ito yung mga files ko. So, kung nakikita nyo siya, medyo madami kasi nga, in-include ko na lang yung mga functionality na kailangan ko at iniwalay ko yung mga I don't know kung nakikita. It includes, yan, notice nyo, footer, header, sidebar, di ba? So, buksan natin tong function. Kasi lahat ng nangyayari sa system, nilagay ko sa function. Para i-call ko na lang sa kung kailangan kong gawin. Kasi lahat ng record binamanage ko. So, wala namang pinagkaiba yung sa add, edit, delete, lahat ng record. Kaya, ginawa ko na lang sa function. Okay, asa na ba yun? Okay, so in this case, I have function. Okay, for example, This one, whenever I create this function or call this function, it will connect to my database. And when I want to query a data, it will execute, I will call the query and execute the command and return the result, something like that. And this one, a function that allows me to retrieve admin details. So SQL, I think you are familiar with this one. So it will return the details of the admin. So it's like full of function that I can reuse in the entire system that I develop, something like that. So puro lang siya query. So bahala na yung interface ko to render this to a table, to a form, to a text box. So ganun lang siya. So that's the primary purpose of function, to isolate and to break down tasks into smaller pieces, and for me to be able to identify whenever a certain function is wrong or returns an error, I can go to a specific function and focus on that error. Okay? So, that's the function. Question so far. May tanong? May tanong po? May tanong? Wala? Okay. Grabe ka mo. Baka tururog na ka mo ha. Okay. Okay, next. By the way, pag-discuss natin ng ano ha, ng database, siguro hindi pa ngayon kasi baka bukas or susunod na araw, discuss naman natin database, pag-uusapan natin yun. Okay? Okay, next. That's what or how function works. Actually, hanggang dito lang slide ko kasi limited time kasi kanila lang ako nag-prepare. Pero pag-usapan natin yung ibang topics. Okay? Okay. Our other topic is, yeah, this I already discussed this one. Write a value and non-value returning functions. So, with or without parameters. Tapos na. So, punta na tayo sa super global variable. I think you are already familiar with post. I think post is the common method of submitting data into a form, correct? Okay. So, uh, what are other uses of post? So, what are the other uses of this one? For example, you want to transfer the data. Let's say, for example, you have a page here and the user inputs a username or password. The only way to do that is to transfer the data is to use super global variable post. Well, that's one method. All you have to do is to enclose that into a form so that whenever the user submits a data, those data will be transmitted to another file. Okay? So that's how. Let me demonstrate again. Okay. So for example, gawa tayo ng bago. Let's say post.php. Something like that. Okay. So we just create HTML. Okay. Head. Title. Huwag tayo maglagay ng title. Body. Something like that. Okay. Let's say for example, already demonstrated the login, right? So try naman natin sa table. Okay. Sa table, let's say you have several records. Okay. So tr and td. Let's say, hindi ako gumagamit ng bootstrap So border 1 para naman may border tayo. td name td position let's say TD. I'm defining a column, actions. Okay. Okay, so I'm going to duplicate this one several times. 1, 2, 3. Let's say 3 records. Let's say Jose, Manalo, post. So action, it's either you add or delete, something like that. Let's say href, let's say edit, or let's say action, or let's say process. Wag na natin, let's say td, let's say edit, delete, something like that. Ganun lang siguro para mas later na lang natin palitan. Ma-perform lang natin yung needed. Let's say Vic Soto, post din. Let's say, sino ba? Juan San Pedro. Let's say manager, something like that. Okay, so let's try to render that into our page. I need to close pala the ano. Okay. Okay, so let's try to render the page. Asan yung ginamit ko kanina? Nawala. Nawawala. Na-close ko ata. Okay. So let's try. Okay. Localhost, web dev, session 2. Okay, so we have session 3 na pala tayo. Kaya pala iba. Anyway, so topic 1, let's say index pala yun. So let's say post.php. Okay, so we have this one. So what if we want to transfer the value that we want to edit to another file in order to perform this action? So you can do is, it's either you use a post. So try natin sa post. Kaya lang sa post, kailangan gagawa kayo ng form. Okay? Let's say, maximize natin yung okay, so form method post, okay, action process dot php, okay, and ganyan. Okay. Then of course input type, let's say hidden. Okay. Hidden value para hindi nakikita ng user. Jose Manalo. Okay. Okay. And another input, we call that submit. Submit. Tawagin natin siyang edit. Something like that. Okay? So let us try to render this one. Okay, instead of Jose Manalo, Vic Soto naman. Okay. This one pala is edit. Hindi pala sa ano. Edit. edit. Okay. Now, let's try to render them into our page. Okay. Ah, type. Dapat pala submit. Okay, edit. Submit. Sorry. Nalimutan ko. Okay. Okay. Ayan. So, meron na tayong edit. So, gagawa tayo ng another file code process.php. So, process.php. So, ibig sabihin, dito papasok lahat ng sinabit ko. So, gawin natin. If iset, ibig sabihin nun, check ko kung may na-set bang variable, global variable. Let's say, request. Ito, gamit na natin ng request. Para kahit post or get, pa-call natin. So, ano yung lalagay ko dito na parameter? So, I have, let's say, pangalan na natin yung edit ng edit. Di ba? So, let's say, name, edit, para ma-distinguish natin kung edit or delete. Okay, ito pangalanan natin, name. Let's say, name din. Something like that. Okay, so ulitin na lang natin to. Okay, ngayon, we have process and we want to check if the edit, where does edit came from? It came from the name of the button. So if ever I encountered edit from a button, so which means I need to, let's say, echo edit dot request, then tawagin natin yung name. Okay, something like that. Okay, now let's try. So refresh natin. Okay, let me, okay, edit. Okay, edit Jose Manalo, back. Edit Big Soto. So that's the only way you can transfer data. It's either you use global variable like get or post. So ang post ginagamit natin for transferring data using a form. How about get? So I think the most simplest way here is using get. Let me show you why. Instead of using form, you can just put, let's say, anchor tag href equals process dot php, something like that. Okay, then close, delete a, something like that. Okay, now we need to add parameters, di ba? So ibig sabihin, maglalagay tayo ng parameter sa kanya. Sinong i-delete? Sinong name niya? Okay, equals, let's say, Jose Manalo. Jose Manalo. Okay, something like that. So, what will happen to this one? If you use this one, you are adding parameter to a link, ginagamit mo yung get method. Okay, so let's try. So, tawagin natin to uli. Tawagin natin siya. So, since ang ginamit natin na parameter ay name, eto, gagawin natin name. Okay? Or you just palitan natin delete. Delete na lang. Delete para hindi mag-confuse dito sa name ng text box. Okay, delete. Something like that. So, delete, request, delete. Okay, kasi may variable na siya. So, let's try to, test. Okay, refresh. Notice nyo, naging link na siya. Okay. Click. Okay, name. Name pala na ilagay natin, hindi pala siya delete. Okay. Name, dapat name. Okay. Refresh. Delete. Name, name pa rin. Teka lang ah. Okay. Na-save ko ba? Dapat delete ito. Delete. Save. Delete. Yeah. Delete Jose Manalo. So that's the difference between implementing the super global with the form in get. Because as you can see, sa ating link, nakalagay na yung file, then parameter na delete, then value ng parameter. So that's why alam natin yung action na gagawin. Okay? So that's how you use get and post and request. Okay? So madalas mapapansin nyo sa mga pages, diyan ganito, ID equals, let's say 1, let's say end, action, delete, equals delete, something like that. Kasi pag lumabas na sa browser, ina-access natin yung parameter na ID and action, kung anong value nila. So this will become the value. Okay? Something like that. Okay? So that's how. Question so far? Question so far? Question? Hello?
Wala naman po, sir.
Sure ha? Sure. Sure ka mo ha? Okay. Sure ka mo. Okay. Okay. How about session? Anong pinagkaiba ng session? It's also super global, but session allows you to maintain the value into your browser. Magkaiba to This one, variable. Diba? Variable. Ito sa browser na maintain yung data. Diba napapansin nyo sa Lazada, pag nag-order ka mo, kahit i-refresh nyo yung page, yung order no, nandun pa rin sa cart. Diba? Pagka, let's say, nag-login kayo, kahit i-close nyo yung browser, basta nakalagin na kayo, pag inopen nyo lang yung browser, nakalagin pa rin kayo. That's because of the session variable. Kasi automatically, pag session siya, sinisave niya yan sa browser. Okay, so how do we do that? So para ma-implement natin to, try natin gumawa ng login para alam natin yung implementation niya. So let's try. Let me rename this index para hindi natin na ano ba ginawa natin dito sa index? Function. So pangalanan natin siyang function. Okay? Function. Okay. This time, gagawa tayo ng new file called login. So, login.php. Okay. Ngayon, okay, nakalabas siya. Pasok natin sa topic 1. Move. Okay. Ngayon, login. So, syempre, if you want to create a login, we need to have a form. Okay. So, kunin natin yung mga sample natin na markup. Okay. I'm not using Bootstrap ha. Okay. Let's say login. Okay. Now, we need to create a form. So, gawa tayo ng table para naka-align. So, table, we need to create tr for the row, td, okay. Let's say username. Username, something like that. Very basic lang ha. Td, let's say input type text, let's say name, username, something like that. Okay. Then td. Okay, so let's copy and paste this one. Okay, let's say password. Okay, password. Password. Para asterisk yung lalabas sa Then we create another. Tawagin naman natin siyang input. Okay, palitan natin. Okay. Oh, sorry. Okay, input type, reset. Let's say let's say value means yung caption ng button, reset, and of course submit. This one is login, diba? Okay, value. Okay, of course we need to have, let's say h1. Okay, so login form. Since meron tayong login form, we need to use form. Okay, then remove natin siya, lagay natin sa loob. So what will happen to this one is, let me indent this part. We should have a login form. Okay, so session tayo, session. So our topic is session. Okay, session, we have login. So ganito siya, di ba? I forgot the reset, type reset. Ano nangyari? Reset, reset. Okay. Okay, so we have, okay, let me arrange, let me, let's make the table, the button right beside each other. Okay, so yan. So reset, login. So what will happen to this one is that once we submit, we are going to create a session variable. So in order to do that, action, let's say process, login dot php, and syempre method post. So we need to create process login in our file. So process login.php. So ibig sabihin, once we click the submit button, all the data will be submitted here. So login. So we need to call, let's put some name here sa ating submit button. So name equals login. Okay, so dito, check natin. Let's ask some question. If is set request login, is login button from previous page was clicked? If yes, we need to get the username. Username, so request, okay. This is not request dapat siya. Okay. Username, something like that. Password. Okay. So, password. Okay. Ngayon, let's say meron tayong function. So, function, let's say check user. So, username, password. So, assuming na-check natin siya, return natin true. Okay? So, return natin true. Ibig sabihin, kahit anong password ilagay natin to or username, login tayo niyan. So, if uh, let's say, if not, check user, lagay natin yung username, password. So, meaning dito, ang gagawin na natin, query tayo sa database, something like that. Pag nahanap natin siya, return tayo ng true. Something like that. That's the basic logic of that. So, if not, ibig sabihin walang user, gawin natin, echo, oops, I have an error here. If not, check user, password, may close. Gawin natin ganyan. What's wrong? Anong mali nito? Username. Check user, password. Okay naman ah. Invalid user. Else, echo user access granted. Something like that. Okay. Okay. Now, let's try. Let's demonstrate. Okay. Refresh. Okay. Let's say 1. Anything. 1, 2, 3, 4. Login. Okay. Access granted. It's because lahat ng chine-check ko dito, magiging true. What if false siya? Kunwari, nag-return siya ng false. Okay. Dapat lalabas, invalid user. Okay. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Invalid user. Now, saan papasok yung session? So, ngayon, if ever na tama yung password niya, gawin na natin true. So, true. If ever na tama yung password niya, gagawa tayo ng session. To start a session, you need to write session start at the top of your program. Start. So that we could create a session variable. Okay? Something like that. Ngayon, pag access granted siya, gagawa tayo ng session variable. Example, session, okay. Pangalanan na natin siyang user. Okay. So, kung sino may nag-login at successful siya, i-store natin yung username. Okay. And then, kunwari, meron tayong role niya. Let's say role, session, role niya, oops, let's say administrator. Okay. Then of course, yung full name niya. Kunwari, full name. Okay. Name. Okay, let's say Jose Manalo. Okay. Something like that. So that's how you create session. So whenever you set a value to a session, it always maintains inside your browser. So, paano natin ma-check? Let us create a new file called main, let's say main.php. Okay? So, in this particular file or in this particular uh, page, we need to check if the user is logged in successfully. So, we need to create a session, start, something like that. Okay? Ngayon, if session is set, di ba? So, na-set ba yung session? Is set. Na-set ba yung session? Let's say, anong session name? So, this is the session variable, the name of the session variable user. So, let's double check. So, this one will be set if the successful login is being poured. Okay? So, yung session user ba ay na-set? If yes, ganito gagawin natin. Welcome. Let's echo natin. Echo. Welcome. Then, display natin yung pangalan niya. Session. Di ba meron tayong name? Name. Di ba? Something like that. Okay. Let's put them into a paragraph P. Okay. Then another. So P, something like that. Okay. Ngayon, aside from that, display natin yung role niya. Okay. You are logged in as an role. Okay. Something like that. Okay. So, if ever the user manually access the main, we need to, ano nangyari dito? Kulang ako ng parentheses. We need to uh, make the user forced to log in into our system. Okay? So, meron tayong mali. Okay, okay lang yun. Okay, session. So, if ever na hindi siya nakalog in, gawin natin, so header, redirect natin siya. Location, colon, login ka muna, .php. So, pag manually siyang pumunta sa main, nang hindi siya nag-login, i-force natin siya na pumunta ng login page. Okay, so let's try. Okay, now, let's do this one. Punta tayo sa main, dapat, pag nag-click tayo ng main, expect natin na mapupunta tayo sa login. Okay, I'm going to click the main. Observe the behavior of my page. Click the main. Notice, nasa login siya. Okay. Try natin 1. Kunwari lang. 1, 1, 2, 3, 4. So, as expected in our code, kung sino mang nalagin natin, automatic malagin siya at magkikreate siya ng session. After that, what will happen? Okay. By the way, nakalimutan ko, dapat pala, i-redirect natin siya sa main after niya mag-login. Okay. So, yun. So, after setting the variable, papuntay na natin siya sa main.php. Okay? So, I'm going to log in. So, notice nyo, napunta na tayo sa main.php. Welcome, Jose Manalo. You are logged in as administrator. So, I'm going to click enter again at main. Babalik tayo sa main. Dapat, nandun pa rin tayo. Hindi na tayo ma-redirect since naka-login tayo at na-recognize na natin si Jose. Okay? Ngayon, balik tayo sa login. Login, enter. So notice nyo, nakalagin na tayo pero bakit inaalaw pa rin tayo maglogin? It is because hindi tayo naglagay ng code to check if the user is logged in. So again, kopyahin natin to. So I'm going to copy this one ulit. Okay? Okay. Punta tayo sa login. So if ever the user is logged in successfully into our system at bumalik siya sa login.php, dapat hindi na siya mag-login kasi nakalagin na siya. Nakuha yung point? Okay. Now, if not set, if na-set yung user, ang gagawin natin, papapuntay natin siya doon sa main. Or, dapat siya mag-login otherwise. So, header, location, main.php. Since may session variable tayo regarding sa user, so, papapuntay na lang natin siya sa main. Hindi na dapat siya mag-login. Okay? So, ganito gawin natin. Login tayo uli, enter, dapat mapunta tayo sa main. Okay? Try natin uli. Login.php, enter. Notice, hindi tayo nakakapunta sa login kasi nakalogin tayo. Okay? That's how you use session. Imagine you have a product, nilagay nyo sa session, pag nagpunta kayo sa cart, nandun pa rin yung product nyo. Diba? So, lagay tayo ng logout. Okay? Okay. Lagay tayo ng logout. Okay. So, gawin natin, logout. Ibig sabihin ng logout, it's like we are trying to destroy the session. Parang i-erase natin yung session para magmukhang hindi siya nakalagin. Okay? So, logout. So, ang gagawin natin is, para hindi nakakalito, let me remove muna the echo. Something like that. Okay. Ngayon, logout. So, lagay tayo ng link. href equals logout.php. So, ang gagawin nito, pag na-click natin yung link, i-destroy natin yung session. Okay. Okay. So, echo natin. Echo. Something like that. I use single quote since meron akong double quote sa loob. Okay. So, I have an error here. Unexpected. Hindi niya ina-accept. Okay. Anyway, acceptable naman yan. Check natin. Di ba? Acceptable na siya. Okay. So, ngayon, punta tayo sa main. Okay. Dapat, pag logout ko, pag nagbalik ako sa main, hindi na dapat ako accept. Instead, mapupunta dapat ako sa login. Since nag-logout na ako, I need to login again. Okay. So, to do that, let's create another file. We call this logout.php. Okay. So, in this page, I'm going to create a session again. Session start. So that I could access the session variable. Okay. Of course, mag-destroy lang ako o magde-delete ako ng session kung existing siya. So, if iset and $sign session user. Okay. So, is the user session existing? If yes, I'm going to destroy the session. When you say destroy, lahat ng session variable under this website or under this localhost, etc. will be removed. Tama po. Okay, so how do we do that? So, session destroy. Okay, destroy. Okay? So, as simple as that. You just remove all the session. So, be careful of using session destroy. There are actually two types of uh, session destroy. It's either you unset, something like that. Pag sinabing unset, isang variable lang ng session ang tatanggalin nyo, while others are being maintained. Pero pag destroy, lahat ng variable ng session matatanggal. Okay? So, mamaya explain natin yon. Okay. So, destroy muna tayo. Okay, session destroy. So, in this case, we will be removing our session. Okay? So, ganun lang ata siya. Session destroy lang. Okay, so now, let us try to... Now, assuming, di ba nakalagin tayo? So, in this page, we are actually logged in. So, once we log in, we will destroy the session. So, ibig sabihin, we're expecting that after we log out, we'll go back to the main page. By the way, I forgot to write redirect. So, location. Let's go back to main. Okay, main.php. So, we expect that when we go back to main, the main will transfer us to login. Okay? Since kailangan natin mag-login. Okay, so, log out. Okay, so now, I have a login. So, balikan natin yung logout. Okay, so the logout will not allow me to delete any session because I'm not logged in. Instead, the logout will just pop up right here. Kasi wala naman akong ginawang condition to set. So, lagay tayo else. Kung wala naman siyang user, so gawin lang natin, redirect lang tayo uli sa main. Or anyway, all you have to do is to do not put else. Instead, just put this one. Para ma-destroy niya, after niya ma-destroy, redirect tayo sa main. So, let's try. Okay? So, log out, enter. So, punta tayo sa login. So, gawin natin ulit. Let's say, Jose, ulit. 1, 2, 3, 4. So, balikan natin yung login. We expect na babalik tayo sa main since naka-login siya. Login, enter. Okay, di tayo napunta sa login. Try natin log out. Log out, login ulit tayo. So, that's how session works. Okay. Question. Question. How was the presentation? Yan. So, Jose or Jose, 1, 2, 3, 4, log in. So, nandun na ako sa main page. Log out. Ulit, Jose, blah, blah, blah. Log in. Try natin login ulit. Login.php. So, we will be expecting that babalik tayo sa main kasi nakalagin na ako. Okay. So, question. Question po. Magagamit nyo to lalo na sa mga magde-develop ng web-based application. Magagamit nyo to. So, hindi ko lang muna diniscuss yung database part dito sa login ha. Kasi hindi pa naman tayo magde-database pa. And besides, magkakaroon tayo ng too much information overload. Okay? Kasi baka ma-confuse kayo. Okay? So, question so far. Question. Question? Okay. Some of you might be familiar with cookies. Ano pinagkaiba ng cookies sa session? Ang session kasi, once na uh, mga website, once na nag-clear na sila, nag-log out na sila, matatanggal na. Ang cookie kasi, hindi. Pero ang cookie kasi, meron siyang specific period kung kailan siya active. Okay? Kasi pwede mo siyang lagyan ng expiration date. Remember when you access a website and when you save your username or password, naalala nyo, nakalagay sa Facebook, save username and password, hindi session yun, kung hindi cookies. Kasi ang cookies, hindi kasi yung session kasi active lang siya pag yung application mismo ang nagmanipulate sa kanya. Pero yung cookies, rather, yung cookies, active siya kahit anong browser ang or application ang gamitin mo. So, yung session, magagamit mo lang siya doon sa application na create sa kanya. Pero ang cookies, kahit anong web application, pwede mong ma-access yung cookies na ginawa mo and nag-expire siya. Example, Facebook. Nakalagay, remember username and password. Diba? When you remember your username and password, automatic pasok yun sa database ng browser mo called cookies. So, kaya pag nag-type ka ng username, automatic na-fill agad yung password ng nakasave na user password mo doon sa browser. Nagets po? So kaya kung hindi sa inyo yung
Yes, sir.
unit, wag niyo gagamitin ha. Kasi alam niyo na may mga ngayon, uso na ngayon ng pag-hack ng mga password. So wag kayo mag-save ng username password sa browser. Lalo na kung hindi sa inyo personal na unit. Okay? Question so far. Oh, question. Question po. Kawawa naman yung pusa. Yan. May pusa kasi ako dito eh. Nasa last page. Yan. Yan, mabait yan. Pag nagtanong kayo sa kanya, sasagutin niya kayo. So, meron po bang tanong?